He used to believe that truth was the only way to keep a family together, until the day truth itself threatened to tear it apart. That was the moment he learned that love could also mean silence, and protection could come dressed as deceit. The morning it began. The sky was pale, the house quiet, except for the small sound of his daughter humming in the next room. He looked at her reflection in the window glass, thinking how easily innocence mirrors trust. He had made a promise years ago, one he could never repeat aloud, to keep them safe, to carry the burden alone. It sounded noble, then almost heroic. But lies have their own gravity. They pull slowly, quietly, until everything that orbits around them starts to fall. The first time he lead it was small, a simple omission of detail. He thought he could contain it within himself. But lies breed in silence. They grow in the dark. They learn your voice, and eventually they start speaking for you. He built his truth like a wall brick by brick with words that sounded solid enough to stand on. When he spoke, he chose calmness over panic, reason over emotion. His wife believed him. His children believed him. And for a long time, even he believed himself. At night, when everyone slept, he would sit in the living room, staring at the shadow of the staircase, and imagine how it would sound if the truth ever came down those steps. His heartbeat was the only confession he allowed. Each thump a reminder that the lie was alive inside him, feeding off his guilt. He told himself he was protecting them, protecting their future. From what he once was, from what he had done, from what might still be watching. It was easy to believe when no one asked questions, but silence is fragile. It cracks under the weight of memory. Sometimes he would wake up to the sound of his own name whispered in dreams, the same way it was spoken that night years ago. The night he decided that truth was too heavy for a child to carry. He thought he could keep it buried under routines, under laughter, under birthdays, and bedtime stories. But the ground beneath them was made of glass. Every step echoed with what he refused to admit, with what his daughter would look at him with those quiet eyes, like she could see through the walls he had built. He wondered what she saw, a father or a ghost of one. The day he promised to protect them, he didn't know that protection and imprisonment could look the same. He only knew that the truth was sharp and the world unforgiving. So he wrapped his family in silence, thinking it was safety. But silence cuts too, just slower and deeper. He carried that weight, oxygen, until it became impossible to tell where he ended and the lie began. He still remembers the feeling of her small hand on his when she was little, and how she asked him once if monsters were real, he said no, without hesitation, not knowing that he was already becoming one. Not the kind with claws or teeth, but the kind that hides behind love and calls it protection, the kind that smiles through fear and learns how to live inside his own disguise. The weight of that promise never left his shoulders. It only grew heavier every time he pretended everything was fine, every time he said goodnight, every time he chose silence over truth, and in that silence, something sacred began to rot inside him. What he didn't know yet was that the lie had already started to protect itself, waiting patiently for the day it wouldn't need him anymore. The house had learned to keep his secrets better than he ever could. Its walls absorbed every whisper, every argument that ended with a quiet sorry, every truth that died halfway through a sentence. The photographs on the mantel smiled, two perfectly framed moments that pretended everything was untouched by time or regret in that house. Even the air seemed trained to stay still. It was the kind of silence that hummed faintly beneath the sound of ordinary life, the sound of coffee cups meeting, the table, the creak of the old floorboard outside the daughter's room, the rustle of papers in his study. He thought he had mastered control. But houses remember what people try to forget. Every lie leaves a shadow in the light of morning. His wife used to open the curtains, and the same sunlight that touched her face also revealed the dust in corners, the dust he couldn't see. Without squinting, truth is like that, always there, just hard to face without effort sometimes. He walk through the hallway at night and feel the floor breathe under his steps, like the house itself was shifting, restless, like it knew something he refused to admit. He wondered if walls could judge, if they knew what happened before the family moved in, how much of him had been absorbed into the wood. The first lie echoed through that hallway like a heartbeat, and over the years the house began to echo it back, soft at first, then louder. He noticed small things, objects that seemed to rearrange themselves, a picture slightly tilted, a drawer left texto com ponchucao corregida open, a clock that stopped at the same time every night. He told himself it was fatigue, imagination, perhaps guilt. But deep down, he knew the house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by his silence. The memories he tried to bury had nowhere else to go, so they nested in corners, in reflections, in dreams. His wife once asked him if he felt the air change when they argued. He said no, but he had noticed it. The temperature dropped a degree every time he lied. The house responded like a living thing, and he feared it more than he feared the truth itself. The family dinners became quieter, the laughter thinner, until one day there was no sound at all except the ticking of the clock that no one had wound in months. His daughter would sit across from him, tracing her finger along the edge of her plate, eyes half lost in thought, as if she too could hear what the walls were saying. The house kept everything. It kept the smell of burnt toast from that morning he forgot her birthday, the faint scent of perfume from the night his wife stopped asking where he went, and it kept the echo of a name whispered once in anger that never left his mind. The house remembered, and in its remembering, it began to show him what he had built, not a home, but a museum of half-truths, a monument to a promise that had turned into a prison. Sometimes he imagined the house breathing around him, inhaling the lie, exhaling guilt. And in those moments, he realized the truth was no longer buried outside. It was inside the walls, inside the air, inside him. She had her mother's quiet and his stubbornness, a dangerous inheritance for a girl who learned too early that silence meant survival. She was still a child when she started watching him, not the way children watch their fathers, with wonder, but the way detectives watch suspects, with patience. She never asked questions, yet her eyes did. Every day they asked, asterisk, why asterisk? Every time he looked away, they asked what he was afraid of. She had grown up inside the lie long enough to mistake its rhythm for truth. She didn't remember when the house last felt warm, but she remembered the sound of hesitation in his voice whenever he said her name, and how it trembled slightly when she hugged him from behind. She thought it was age. He knew it was guilt. There was something about her gaze that unmade him. It stripped the layers of justification he had built over the years, the reasons, the excuses, the noble motives. Each time their eyes met, a piece of his armor cracked. She didn't accuse him. She didn't need to. The way she watched him was enough. It was a mirror he could no longer look into without seeing what he had become. Sometimes she would walk through the house barefoot, following the creaks in the floorboards, her small fingers grazing the walls as if reading Braille sentences carved by ghosts. He imagined her tracing the same path he once did the night it all began, when he made the choice to lie, to save them. He wanted to tell her everything. He rehearsed it countless times in his mind. How he would start with, "I did it for you," and end with, "I'm sorry." But every version ended in her silence. And that silence frightened him more than any confession he could make, because her silence wasn't ignorance. It was understanding, a kind he hadn't earned. He caught her once looking through an old photo album. She stopped on a picture of him, younger, smiling next to someone she didn't recognize. She pointed at the man and asked quietly, "Who is he?" He felt the air leave his chest. For a moment, he said, "An old friend," and she nodded, but didn't look convinced. She didn't need to be. She had already learned that in their family, truth was something that arrived in pieces, never whole. She began writing in a notebook lines she never shared. Words, she said, were just stories. But he knew they weren't stories. They were records. Each line, a wound pressed onto paper. When she smiled, it reminded him of his wife before the silence settled between them. It was the kind of smile that pretended everything was fine, and he hated seeing himself in that pretense. He wondered if she would forgive him once she knew, or if forgiveness even mattered when damage becomes inheritance. One night he found her asleep at her desk, notebook open. The last thing she had written was, asterisk, "I think I understand him now." But understanding isn't the same as forgiving. Asterisk, he closed the notebook gently and turned off the light. Standing in the doorway, he realized her eyes weren't just mirrors. They were the truth itself, patient, waiting, inevitable. It happened without warning, not as an explosion, but as a quiet collapse, the kind that starts inside a breath and spreads outward until even the air feels heavier than guilt. It began when his daughter found the letter, the one he had hidden behind the bookshelf. Years ago, written by someone who no longer existed, at least not in the way she remembered. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting desperate, and the moment her voice trembled through the first sentence, he knew the walls he built had finally begun to fall. She didn't look at him as she read. She didn't need to. Her silence carried every question he had spent a lifetime avoiding. His wife stood behind her face, pale lips parted. But no words came when she finished. She placed the letter on the table between them, as if it were evidence in a trial she never wanted to hold. He reached for it, but she moved her hand away, and that simple gesture told him everything he had feared. The lie had finished its purpose. It no longer protected. It no longer protected what used to be a family, now sat like strangers orbiting the same shame. He tried to speak, to explain, to dress the truth in logic. But the words refused. They were stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat. He realized, too late, that the truth doesn't need explanation, it only needs space to exist. He had denied it that space for too long, and now it was consuming his silence piece by piece. His daughter finally looked at him. Her eyes were calm, but not forgiving. They were steady, like a mirror held up to a man who could no longer look away. Her voice barely above a whisper said, "You could have told us," and that was all it took. Everything inside him began to crumble. Memories came rushing back. The night he decided to lie, the moment he convinced himself it was mercy, the sound of the promise he made to no one but his own fear. He tried to speak her name, but it came out as a sob, half breath, half confession. He saw her flinch, not from anger, but from recognition, because, in that moment, she saw not the father who raised her, but the man who had been trying to disappear inside his own story for years. The remembered began to release its memories, the smell of rain on old wood, the faint echo of laughter long gone. It was as if the lies had been the only thing keeping it standing. And now the structure itself groaned under the weight of truth. The clock that had stopped for months began to tick again. Slow rhythmic sound that filled the room like a heartbeat reborn his wife. Finally spoke her voice, steady, softer than he deserved. She said, "The truth was never the danger you were." And those words landed like absolution and punishment all at once. He didn't defend himself. He just nodded slowly, because she was right. The truth had been waiting patient. Inevitable. It didn't need to break in. It wasn't already home. In the days that followed, the house grew quiet again. But this silence was different, heavier, yet cleaner, like air after a storm. The truth had settled into the cracks of their lives, and there was no going back. He moved through the rooms like a guest touching walls that no longer felt familiar. The photographs still hung where they always had, but their smiles looked foreign, as if they belonged to another family, another life. The letter lay folded on the table, untouched. His wife spent most mornings by the window, watching the light shift across the yard. Their daughter stopped writing for a while, then started again. Though he never asked what the new pages contained, he knew they weren't about him anymore. She had moved beyond his story, beyond the walls he built. Sometimes he'd catch her humming the same tune she used to as a child, and it filled him with something he couldn't name, a mix of regret and relief. He thought often about what protection really meant, how many times he used the word love when he actually meant control, how many times he said safety when he meant silence. The lie had given him purpose for so long that its absence left a hollow too wide to fill. But he didn't try anymore. He let the emptiness stay, because it was honest. It was all he had. He started leaving the door open at night, as if inviting the truth to keep him company. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch and watch the shadows stretch across the yard, and imagine her voice, the one from the letter, soft, certain, forgiving, in a way no one in the house could be. He wondered if the truth had really destroyed them, or if it had simply shown them who they always were, broken people trying to love each other through fear and shame. Maybe that was all any family ever was. He never found redemption, but he found peace in confession, not spoken aloud, but lived quietly, day after day, the kind of redemption that doesn't erase the damage, but teaches you how to carry it differently. He began repairing the house, one nail, one board at a time, patching the walls that had listened for too long sometimes. His daughter helped without speaking. They worked side by side in silence, and in that wordless labor, something fragile began to heal. On the last night before she left for college, she hugged him for the first time in years and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't asked for what, he just held her tighter, afraid that if he spoke, the silence would shatter again. When she walked away, he stayed by the door, watching her fade into the dusk. It felt like forgiveness, or maybe just distance, but it was enough. He looked back at the house behind him, the place that had seen everything, and for the first time, he didn't feel it judging him, only holding him the way old walls hold warmth. He thought about that promise he made all those years ago to protect them from the truth, and realized the truth had protected them from him. In the end, the cost of protection was everything, but maybe losing everything was the only way he could ever understand what love really meant. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe to The Silent Truth and tell us in the comments if you ever lived something like this, or if you know someone who did.